Dorsía Smith Silva is the author of An Inheritance of Drowning, an 8-time Pushcart Prize nominee, Best of the Net finalist, Best New Poets nominee, Cave Canem Poetry Prize semifinalist, Obsidian Fellow, poetry editor at The Hopper, and full professor of English at the University of Puerto Rico. She is also a member of the Get the Word Out poetry cohort and 5 over 50 cohort of poets and writers in 2024. She is the author of Good Girl, a poetry micro chapbook, editor of Latina Chicana Mothering, and the co-editor of 7 books. Dorsía Smith Silva has a PhD in Caribbean literature and language.
So tell me more about yourself. Tell me about your grad school experience.
Okay, so for graduate school, I went to the University of Puerto Rico in the Department of English, and my PhD is coming from the background of Caribbean literature and language. And it was a really great experience for me because I had the opportunity to learn about many different Caribbean writers, Kwame Das, Lorna Goodison, Brathwaite, Velma Pollard, Jean Bentabriz, Olive Sr., and M. Nurbizi Philip. And I think the best thing was that they really encouraged us to not only write, but to go to conferences. And one of the conferences that I went to was in St. Thomas, and that is where I met Velma Pollard. She was the guest speaker, and our hotel rooms were actually right next to each other. So we kept running into each other and we kept talking, and one thing led to another. And then we actually, kept in touch. And it was funny because people say, we're going to, I'll keep in touch with you. Here's my email. And I thought, she's not really going to write me back. And we've been writing ever since. And she's been an amazing friend. She's a mentor. She's really helped me with the writing process. She wrote a blurb for the book. And she's giving me so much sound advice over the years, not just with writing, but being a mom. She has, children and grandchildren. And when I was having my child, I thought, it's very different, having a child in Puerto Rico in other places. Like Puerto Rico is very family centered. And, sometimes in the States, they say, oh, the child means, so much, but it's more of, just see the child, but not hear it. And in Puerto Rico, the child is very much the center. So I was asking her for like a lot of advice about, how to have what some people think is very hands-on mothering, but that was the best experience for me. And she just gave me, really great advice. And she's just been such a wonderful person to have in my life. So that's also been a really great aspect that's happened from graduate school. And then also M. Nurbizi's work. Her book, Zong, was phenomenal. It was just one of those moments when you're reading something and you're thinking, wow, this is so powerful. And I incorporated part of Zong into 2 of my poems in Inheritance of Drowning. So that was also, really great experience, and just a chance to see the Caribbean, to travel, to learn about different cultures as well. The connections that we have with others was also a wonderful experience.
So are you originally from that region or did you go there for college?
Okay, this is what happened. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, originally from Philly. And then when it came to, I met my husband actually in Europe, and one of us had to move. My husband is from Puerto Rico. One of us had to move. And I said, living in the Caribbean, warm weather all year round, I'll sign up for that. And it was so much easier for me to move to Puerto Rico than for my husband to move to the States, because he had only lived in the States, I think, for not even a year. And so he really doesn't, even to this day, even when we travel, there are so many nuances that my husband doesn't understand, and I have to explain to him. So it's much easier for me to fit into the world of the Caribbean than it is for my husband to fit into the world of the United States. Because there are just so many intricate details that he doesn't understand, like the whole policing, and police brutality. He's like, why does this happen? And I'm like, oh, here we go. Like the long laundry list of the history of the United States and the history of oppression. He doesn't understand that. because in Puerto Rico, it's different. Not saying that there aren't injustices that happen, but it's really different. So for me, my whole life, I mean, I've been in Puerto Rico for it's going to be 25 years. I can't believe it. So almost half my life has been in Puerto Rico, and doing my PhD, I've traveled now throughout the Caribbean more than my husband has. And so when I go to different places, different islands, it's so funny because, I see so many similarities, and I tell my husband, like he's very, very proud of being Puerto Rican, very much, like we're different. So there's arepas, which is, like a fried bread. And I told him, I'm like, arepas is like it's like very similar to Native American culture fried bread. And he's like, no, it's different. It's different. I'm like, no, it's not. And then I told him when I was living, because I did a lot of research and I had to travel and stay for a while doing my research for my dissertation. So when I was doing my research and traveling, I told him, I said, they have Johnny cake in St. Thomas and St. Croix, and that's very similar to fried bread. And he's like, no, it's different. So adobo here, the spice and the seasoning, there's like a similarity to spices and seasoning in Jamaica. So I tell him all the time, the more that you travel, the more that you see, we're very similar, more than we think we are. People think, oh no, we're so different. There are so many similarities. And when I was doing my research, staying in Trinidad and Tobago, there were so many people that looked like me. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, my people, where have you been? I felt like, Trinidad, these are my people. So when you think like, we're so different, I think that those are just falsehoods that have been put out there to kind of keep what I call the BIPOC umbrella separated. Because when you really look at the situation, we're so united. We have so many similarities, and we really shouldn't be thinking about, oh, we're different in this way. We should be thinking about our commonalities. And that was something else that I think was really powerful that I learned during my graduate time.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on the Zong stuff throughout. And I was actually going to ask you because I also encountered Zong during grad school in a couple different classes actually. It's very popular. But then I saw in like your notes section you had like a reference to it. So that's awesome. But how have you managed to maintain a writing practice after outside of academia?
I think it's very challenging, but academia taught me one important aspect, and I think you can carry this throughout your life, about the discipline. And I think when I went to graduate school, when I first started, I was working as a private school teacher full time. So I would teach all day, and then after teaching, rush to the university, take classes, and then on my weekends, I was writing papers. I really didn't have a life, because I was a graduate student. And midway through, I said, okay, I really want to be a full professor. And I switched from being a private school teacher to working full-time contract in my department, and a tenure track job opened. And they said, well, if you really want this tenure track job, you need to have publications, you have to go to conferences, you really have to stand out. You have to be that exception. So I was going to 6, 7, 8 conferences a year. I was writing academic papers. I was writing for encyclopedias. I was doing book reviews. So creative writing had to take a back seat because what they expected was academic writing. And the end goal was I got the tenure track job. And then what came next? Well, you want to get promoted from assistant to associate professor. And then again, it's the same story. You have to publish, you have to go to conferences, which is what I did. And then, oh, what's next? Associate to full, which is what I also wanted. But again, it's the same. So I did all that. And what happened to my creative writing? That had to be in the background, waiting for me, because I knew there's such a short timeline, at least in my university, to get tenure, to get promoted. Otherwise, you're not going to either have that job or you're just going to sag in that rank. And if that's what you want, that's fine. But for me, I thought there are so few BIPOC women that make it to full professor. If I have a chance to get to this rank, full professor, I'm going to do it, even if it means I'm going to sacrifice my creative writing. And the trade-off, though, was that when I got the call, you're full professor, I thought, yes, I made it. I did it. Now I can return to my full love full time, which is writing creatively. And it worked out because that was after Hurricane Maria. I had already had some poems in my head. I had some written in a notebook. And I thought, this could be a book. This could maybe turn into something. Little did I know, the whole publishing industry had changed because when I was doing creative writing, undergrad and graduate school, everything was you had to mail it in, hard copy, old fashioned snail mail. And now it's submittable. You have everything online. You have all these workshops. And then the pandemic came. So then everything now is Zoom and workshops online. So I thought, wow, I have to now take a crash course of publishing and sending everything in online and which journals are still relevant. But being a professor, the discipline comes in, and then you think to yourself, okay, there's a deadline for an open manuscript call. I'm going to send it in. And so for me, the discipline has really been the major force for me as a writer. And you tell yourself, do you want this or not? Because there are so many people that have potential. I hear writers all the time, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but they don't do it. It's like, well, why don't you send it in? Oh, I'm waiting. It's not great. Well, if you're waiting for it to be perfect, you're never going to send it in, because it's never going to be perfect. I mean, really, there's always going to be like an image that could be, I think, fresher, or you're debating about that line break, or you're thinking maybe I should be longer. Maybe I should play around with it. And I even had a friend who said, I think I'm just going to have it stay in my drawer. And I thought, well, if that's what you want, fine. It's your choice. But I kept listening to my friend. I kept thinking, I know you. You're not going to be happy if this poem is sitting in your drawer. You're going to be like, oh, should I send it? Just send it. I mean, the worst is they'll say no, but it's better, to have the no than to be waiting. So I think as writers, sometimes we need to, get out of our own heads and just take the initiative and just send your work. You're never going to get a yes if you're waiting for excellence 100% all the time. There's different levels of that excellence, but the level of excellence that you may be thinking of may be different than the one that gets accepted. And I tell people, you can revise the poem later. Even after the book is accepted, most publishers will say there's some room for revisions. So you can still come back to that poem. It's okay. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I love it. It's ready to go off into the world. It's okay. You can come back to it. It's all right.
I usually go in order, but since you bring it up, if it's all right with you, we can skip to the writing questions and talk about that for a bit. Can you tell me more about your writing process and how you go about creating and revising poems? I'm especially interested to hear you talk about, you mentioned being disciplined, and I love hearing people give organizational strategies. So love to hear more about that.
I think it's really important that you really have, a very frank conversation with yourself, because I have a very tight schedule. I teach classes pretty much all day on Tuesday, Thursday. So I know on Tuesday and Thursday, chances of doing any kind of creative writing, it's just not going to happen. I'm exhausted. I'm mentally drained. It's just not going to happen. So to force myself to sit and try to, have this creative conversation or see what comes out on the page, it's going to be like torture. And I know some people say, oh, you should write every day. That's just not practical for me, because I'm just too tired. And then I get angry with myself and I get annoyed and I put too much pressure on myself. And I think, why? Why should we do that? So I say to myself, Tuesday, Thursdays, I'm not going to write because I'm busy with my full-time job. That leaves Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Wednesdays, sometimes I will have meetings. So if I have a meeting on that Wednesday, I'm not going to write either because I'm focused for the university. So then Monday, Friday, and then sometimes on the weekends, I will have time writing. And so what happens Monday, Wednesday, sometimes there's inspiration that just happens. I'll read something in the newspaper and that will spark the idea of a poem. Or I'll think, oh, why don't I try this form because I'm curious about a form. Or I'll say to myself, okay, I have this poem sitting and I need to revise it. Let's just see what I can do in this amount of time. And for me, it's really time on task. Some people will spend hours. And for me, I don't have that flexibility because I also have a child and my child has to be picked up from school. So I'm looking at the clock like, okay, my child gets out at this time. And as soon as my child gets out of school, I'm mom. I have my mom hat on until my child goes to sleep. So I think of that. I think, okay, I have this time in my day. I need to make it happen in this many hours. And I know other people that'll say, well, I write better at night. I write better in the morning. I'm going to sit in the afternoon and just see what comes out all day. And I really don't have that kind of leisurely, freedom because I'm bound by other responsibilities and obligations. So I'll normally think to myself, okay, like even today, I was reading an article about Hurricane Milton, and this was just a regular article that came up on my phone, and I thought, there's a poem. Because it just sparked something in me about what we endured in Puerto Rico about Hurricane Maria. And the article specifically mentioned the sound of the generators. And that for me was one of the most horrific experiences. I didn't realize how sensitive I was to noise until we had Hurricane Maria, because the generators going off all day long, every day for weeks, and they're so loud. And the decibels, I felt like my ears were going to explode. And so in this article, the person mentions, what happened to the sounds of nature? They've been displaced and replaced by this roar of the generator. And I thought, this will make a great poem. So that's going to be my next poem, is talking about the sensitivity that we have during hurricanes that sometimes we don't think about. We think about, oh, there's a lack of water, maybe access to food. You think of, oh, we have all this debris, what happened to my housing? But we don't think about the other day-to-day experiences that we're encountering, which is sensitivity to noise. And then what happens with these generators? What are we breathing? I mean, people don't really talk about that either. The generators are not meant to last all day, every day, for weeks. And so you think, what are we doing to the environment by having the generators, their use, be so continuous? And what also are we breathing? So I think the poem, I'm not sure which direction it's going to take, but in my mind, I'm thinking of bringing in these aspects too about all the harm of the environment that, the aftermath of the hurricane, what it does to the actual earth, and what it also does to us as well as nature as well, because where are the birds? In Puerto Rico, the birds left. And when they returned, they were looking for flowers and the flowers were not there. So that's another thing that we have to think about too with nature, what happens to the insects. I do have a poem in Inheritance of Drowning that talks about the bee, how the bee is looking for, a flower for pollination and it's not there. And the poor bee mistakes one of my undergarments, a bra for a flower, it's like this tan circle. And I was looking at the bee like, no, you're not going to find anything there. The poor thing was really trying. But they're lost. The bees are disoriented as well. And the birds, when they finally do return, I think they're also probably bewildered. Like, well, what happened? 1 minute, we have all the, this wonderful vegetation, and then the next day it's all gone. And then it takes a while for the rebirth to happen again, for nature to kind of have that cycle again, where everything then comes back, in bloom. So in that sense, we all suffer from a hurricane. So my writing practice, definitely the discipline. And for the revision, I think it's really important. What I do is I have to have a momentary break from the poem. And for some people, it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a few days, but just a momentary break so that I come back to that poem, what I consider with fresh eyes and fresh insight. And I know some people have different practices. One person said, you should write as a drunk person and then revise as a sober person. And I thought that was so funny. For me, I like to use just the idea that you come back in with fresh eyes so that when you look at the poem, you think, okay, where can I enhance the poem? Is it as sharp as it could be? What surprises you when you go back to that poem? Can you read it aloud to yourself? Are the line breaks working? What about the language? What about the diction? And then if there's some surprise in the poem, even for me, coming back to the poem, then I know it's ready to be sent out into the world. I'm like, oh, I'm going to hit submit. I'm going to send it. I'm going to send it. I love it. I love it. Other times I'll send it and I'll say, I'm not quite sure. And I have to come back to it. And then when I come back to it later, then I realize, okay, this is what I was missing. It's like the secret ingredient. And sometimes you can't see it right away. And then there are other poems, it may take you years. I have a poem, not in this book, but I have another poem that is finally getting published into the world very soon. But it took a while. It took over 2 years for that poem to come out into the world. And the first version of that poem was completely different than how it ended. The premise was there. The premise is, you mentioned that I like color. Well, this poem has the word red throughout the poem. It's a bit of a love to colors. Carr Phillips does this so well with his poem based on blue, and then you have Anne Carson, the autobiography of red. So I thought, why not have another poem based on a color? So this poem has red, the different meanings of red, and it started out one way and then it ended completely differently. I mean, I didn't even see the end coming, but in the finished version, it's beautiful and it's powerful, and I can't wait for that poem to be published. It's a beautiful poem. It really is lovely.
That sounds awesome. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
So you bring up the news and you bring up Milton. I'm very curious to know what it's like to publish a book that so prominently features hurricanes in 2024.
Yeah, well, the scary thing is this hurricane season has been so active and it's not over yet. I always circle November 30th, the end of hurricane season on my calendar. And after two hurricanes with Florida, and there's a system potentially forming this week in the Caribbean, it does put me on, heightened alert. And I really try to be sensitive to those levels of trauma in the book, and also think about what everybody has endured. And when I think about An Inheritance of Drowning, what I think about with Puerto Rico, looking at Hurricane Maria, and then the week before we just had Hurricane Irma, I definitely think about the impact of global warming and climate change and the responsibility that we all have when we think about the title of the book, An Inheritance of Drowning. What kind of world are we going to have? We can't keep drowning in these kind of environmental problems that unfortunately a lot of our actions have created. So when I'm talking about the book and I'm talking to different audiences, I try to remind the readers and audiences that we can help the environment. We don't have to keep this drowning. If we're conscious about global warming, climate change, we try to do our part, maybe then we'll have less hurricanes, less intense hurricanes. I've been living in the Caribbean, I mentioned, for almost 25 years. And before Irma and Maria, we never really had, in my time living in Puerto Rico, a major hurricane. My husband experienced Hurricane Hugo, in English Hugo, but in Spanish Hugo. And he said that it was horrible, but that was, according to that time period, once in a lifetime. But now these once in a lifetime hurricanes are becoming more frequent. And it's very frightening that some of the images that I have mentioned in the book they keep coming to fruition. And the prognosis is that it's going to keep happening, that the next hurricane season is going to be stronger, more intense, more devastating, cause more wreckage, more damage, and it's going to be more widespread. I'm sure with Hurricane Milton, and the one that occurred right before that, Hurricane Helene, I'm sure people didn't understand that hurricanes, the path can be unpredictable. And when you're having the forecast, of course, you're hoping and praying for the best. But when the hurricane comes, the hurricane can spin and just cause, devastation. And that's unfortunately what happened to Asheville, North Carolina. So we think, where can we be safe? And many Puerto Ricans left Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, moved to Florida and thought, well, now we're safe. And unfortunately, they found that's not the case. So, I'm a very positive person. I try not to think of, the doomsday, what's going to happen, but we do have to do our part, so that if we do move for whatever reason, we're not moving from trauma to trauma. We're not encountering, another hurricane that's going to leave people in another state of grief and misery. And unfortunately, when we're looking at hurricane season, the prognosis is that. But I do hope to go back to what I mentioned in the very first poem of the book, which is the possibilities, which is that a hurricane can just be circles on a map, just beautiful, bright colors, circles on a map. We don't have to think about, oh my goodness, what kind of devastation this is going to cause? Where is it going to spend to now? Is it level 4, 5, or what they had predicted with Milton? Off the scale. I mean, that is very frightening that they were even thinking that it would be so powerful that it would be like a new category, they were saying, like a level 6. I mean, that to me is catastrophic. So I really do hope that we do our part, that the book makes people think about how can we have this social transformation? And part of that social transformation is getting us to think of the environment as kin. We're all connected here, and that includes our relationship to the environment.
How did experiencing so many hurricanes impact your writing or reading about them in the news?
Well, definitely for Milton, I have to say I was so nervous when I heard that Milton could be a level 6 hurricane. I know what we experience here in Puerto Rico, and your life changes completely. One, you're so nervous before the hurricane. You do all that you can to prepare for the hurricane, but then you're never quite prepared. And I think from what I've been reading, many people now understand that. Even if you have storm shutters, even if you think to yourself, okay, we have enough food and water to last for several days, maybe you have a generator, you're not thinking of long term. You're thinking of maybe 2 or 3 days, and then we'll have our power again. In Puerto Rico was almost 11 months, certain parts of Puerto Rico without electricity. And in my area, we were several weeks without electricity. And so the first few days, you're thinking, okay, let's survey the damage, but you're not really prepared because one, there's so much debris, trees have fallen. In my area, we couldn't get out of our neighborhood. And that's what I'm also reading in Milton. So you're thinking, oh, it's not going to be that bad. There's going to be a cleanup crew. The cleanup crew can't get to you because everything is blocked. So they have to clean up everything first. And then you're thinking, well, FEMA's going to come and they're going to give us aid. Well, FEMA can't really come in either because the streets are blocked. So here, the neighbors helped each other. And what I'm reading now in certain places like Asheville, community members are helping each other. FEMA is finally getting water and food. But the people that don't have electricity, just like in Puerto Rico, they're wondering, well, how's our medication going to stay refrigerated? How are we going to eat in a healthy way? Because eating canned goods for an extended period of time, well, you miss fresh ingredients. And it's also very expensive to have a generator running, and that people are complaining about that. I've been reading because gasoline to run the generator is very expensive. And then many people have had damage caused by excess rain. So then you see all the flood damage. And then here in Puerto Rico, it's also very warm. So after the water recedes, you have a lot of mold. So then you're wondering, well, how can I clean all this mold? A lot of that you can't clean. So you end up throwing things away. So then you think of the expense, you think of rebuilding. So reading all these news articles, it really takes me back to everything that we experienced with Hurricane Maria, except in the case of Milton and Hurricane Helene, I think more aid came quicker to Florida and North Carolina. In Puerto Rico, aid came very slowly. There are still people in Puerto Rico that haven't gotten the aid that they were promised, people that still have the blue tarps because their roofs caved in and they're waiting for the insurance money. In my particular area, we've been fighting with our insurance adjusters for 7 years. We finally got the okay that the money that our insurance provided for us is coming through, but it's been 7 years. And so I wonder, all those people that suffer damages, the windows were blown out, the door frames, completely, blown away. What would have happened if they hadn't gotten all that replaced, and if they had waited 7 years for those funds? So it really shows the inequalities of Puerto Rico being treated as a colony. It really shows how we're drowning, waiting for economic resources to come and help. And this is money that people have put in. What's the purpose of having insurance if insurance cannot cover your claims, which they approve, but then they're taking so long to give the money back to you? And writing in the book, when Hurricane Maria happened, I didn't know at the time I was going to write a book. I just started writing in a journal because the experience was just so traumatic. And I thought, okay, this is the only way I can process what's happening, because I didn't want to worry my husband. We had a child at the time that was quite young, and he really didn't understand the magnitude. So I was really trying to put on this brave face that things were fine, let's go play. Things are going to be normal for my child, which meant, having a safe environment for him. I didn't want him to understand the real gravity of the situation. So I would write about it in my journal. I didn't want him to know, like, mommy waited outside in the hot sun because the supermarket line was so long, they would only let in so many people at a time, because the supermarkets didn't have power, or they would run on a generator, and they would let in so many people at a time to buy goods. So you're waiting in this hot sun for a very long time to buy goods. And this wasn't the first week of the hurricane. This was like week 2, where you're like, okay, let me see if there's anything fresh, fresh food, fresh bread that we can eat, because you're tired of eating canned goods. And we didn't have a generator at the time. So that came later. Which was another process of getting a generator, which we had to get flown in because the generators went very quickly in Puerto Rico. And then a lot of places inflated the prices. So what was $800 was now $1,600 or $3,000. So we found a family member in Florida who got us one and had it flown in at the airport so that we could have a generator. And I mean, now we're prepared. Now we have, the gas stove, generator. We're prepared now if something happens. But at that time, we really thought, Maria wasn't going to be as extreme as as what they said, as what was the forecast. Because the week before, we just had Irma, and Irma was bad, but it wasn't as catastrophic as they also said as well. So I started writing in my journal, and then sometime later, the journals became poems, and then the poems became the book.
So you touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear you speak a bit more about the title and what it means to be an inheritance of something.
An inheritance is a sense of what has been given to us. And yes, there's a lot of love that's given to us and positivity, but the book is really centering those social, political, and economic injustices. And for Puerto Rico, the history of colonialism that has been tied to Puerto Rico and the United States. So for those that don't know, just a quick background on the history of Puerto Rico with the United States. Puerto Rico became a territory of the United States from the US-Spanish War. Spain, when the war ended, had to give, as part of the conditions, to the United States. And so then the United States got Puerto Rico, Guam, and Philippines. Philippines later asked for the independence, got it, but Guam and Puerto Rico are still territories. And I put territories in quotations because Guam and Puerto Rico really do function more as colonies. And so that was thrust upon Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico didn't ask to be a colony of the United States, but it was thrust upon Puerto Rico. And that level of sense of being unequal, because Puerto Rico many times will say, hey, well, we want this. And the United States will say no, because in the end, the United States, those laws will always trump the laws of Puerto Rico. So some people will say, well, that's not really important. Well, yes, because it affects the economics here, food prices. So many rights are affected by that imbalance of a relationship. And if you extend that yardstick, you see that with certain BIPOC communities in the United States, with this inequality, this unfair treatment. So that is what we have inherited. Has been the systemic level of injustices that keeps going. And so the book really touches upon that. And even when we look at, one of my favorite poems in the book, and many people will say, read that poem, is Ghost Talker poem. And many people will say, well, why talk about, that poem in particular mentions the Black women that go missing, but it could be, fill in the blank. Any BIPOC woman that goes missing is not going to have, unfortunately, the same national media coverage as a white woman that goes missing. And some people will say, well, why is that important? Because it shows the injustices of living in the United States. And the poem is so important, that we put that out there, because some people aren't even aware. They're like, oh, really? Well, I never knew that. That's why it's in the book, to bring these issues to your attention and to make you more conscious of them and to really push for a social transformation. So for every person that doesn't know, well, here's the book. Maybe now it'll make you more aware of these issues. Maybe now you'll feel, oh, I need to read about this. One person told me, who had to, read the book, said to me, to give a review, said, I never really understood the relationship Puerto Rico has with the United States. Now I understand that it really does function more as a colony. And I said, great, good. If the book helps you to understand the history of Puerto Rico and the United States, or BIPOC communities, why certain BIPOC communities are, up in arms or protesting for equal rights and treatment, and wondering, when are we going to have our equality? It's in the book. This is what's important. And for the BIPOC women that do go missing, it is to bring national attention to that issue. And maybe now, those that go missing will get more attention now. Maybe people will say, oh, we need to have more coverage, widespread exposure, because there really is this great imbalance of what gets put out in the media when women do go missing.
That's really interesting. I didn't know all of that. I did know that Puerto Rico was a colony at one point, and I'm sure I can look this up afterwards, and you don't have to answer this, but I'm curious to know if Puerto Rico has the same racial issues that the continental US does.
Okay, that is a really tricky question. Overall, I would say no. I mean, like, for instance, like, one is in the United States, there are many instances of police brutality against brown and Black people. And I also mentioned that in An Inheritance of Drowning. There have been so many cases of people that have been killed by the police, people that have been stopped, and you think, well, how could this traffic stop end with a person being shot, killed, or they go to jail for a minor infraction, and then they die on the way to the jail, or they die in jail. And you think, well, how did this happen? And one of my poems is, While Black, and then it lists in the shape of a gun all the ways that people have been harmed, arrested, questioned just for being Black in public spaces. So that in Puerto Rico, I don't see to that extent. I'm not saying that there isn't levels of racism. Racism here definitely also is tied into class and access to resources. I see this all the time, especially when we get into access to education, access to certain neighborhoods. But we see that also, in the States. We see, who can, everything from who has access to tutoring to get to the higher education top colleges, who has access to pay for certain kinds of extracurricular activities. It's very expensive. The neighborhoods that you live in, who has access to those neighborhoods? Well, normally you have to have the financial means to have access to those neighborhoods. So we see how that works in the United States, and to a degree that also works here in Puerto Rico. Most people in Puerto Rico do not send their children to the local public school unless the public school has a lot of resources. But unfortunately, some of the public schools here don't have the resources. So what ends up happening is people will say, I'm going to send my child to a private school. But what happens if you don't have the money to send your child to a private school? So I think we start seeing that dichotomy, those who go to private schools, those who go to public schools. And there's nothing wrong with going to a public school. But some of my students have said, my public school didn't have, for instance, didn't have soap in the bathroom, didn't have all the books. And so for me, when I hear these stories, that reminds me of certain public schools in the United States where the history books are 50 years old. Well, how can you study history and the book is 50 years old? There's no modern context there, where there's one computer in the classroom and they expect all the children to share it, versus a private school where every child has a computer. So you see so many imbalances. And I think in Puerto Rico, we definitely see that. But that kind of straight animosity where, oh, I'm going to the store and they see me, for instance, let's say in the United States, and they say, okay, you look this way, we're not going to, give you any kind of service because we automatically look at you and think you can't afford this, or we don't want to be bothered with you because you look this way. In Puerto Rico, you have your money, here's your service, here's your good. Thank you very much and come again. So I don't see that level of hostility, that same level of racial animus that I do in the United States, but I don't want to say it doesn't happen. And I also don't want to say that there are not stereotypes, because if you come from a certain area here in Puerto Rico, let's say, and the same in the United States, if you say I come from a project here in Puerto Rico, they're called caseríos. If you say you come from a project, people will stereotype you. And it's a very negative stereotype. And then they couch you, they put you in a certain kind of bracket, and they don't want you to, move from that bracket. But in the United States, for me, it's much more dangerous placing, because once they put you there, it's like they will do everything they can to demolish you, to break your spirit, so that it's really impossible to get out of that, public housing project. Here, I think there were opportunities, because in my case, I'm a professor at the University of Puerto Rico. The tuition, it's expensive here, but it's still quite affordable, and so you can think to yourself, I can still get an education. I can be around people who want to help me. As far as the United States, where some institutions, sometimes it feels more like us versus them. We want your money, but we don't really want you to be here. We want your presence, but we really don't want you to be visible. So you have that double bind of not really wanting to be accepted.
Thank you for sharing that. That's
Sure.
fascinating to hear. On a related note, Vincent Toro writes in the foreword that Inheritance of Drowning is also a model of poetry as protest. In the year 2024, what does the phrase poetry as protest mean to you?
Yes. Poetry as protest is everything. It is our time, people. It is everything that we want to say and need to say. So it's our call as BIPOC people to say it and be unafraid, to be unfiltered, and to finally put what needs to be said on the page. I think for so long, we have been worried about, well, am I going to offend this person? And how is this going to be perceived? And what is going to be, the correct thing to say. And I think over the years, we have realized, why are we hiding? Why are we unafraid? Just say it, put it on the page. And if people get offended by that, that has nothing to do with us. That is their perception, because this is our story and this is our time. And for me, it's very powerful, meaningful time for all of these stories to finally be put out there, especially in print. Before, a lot of our stories were oral. Nothing wrong with oral stories. Love it. But what normally stays with us is the scribal, what's in print. So now it's in print. We can go and say, oh, have you heard that book? Here, we can teach that book. We can pass on that book. The book can be in a public library. The book is going to be there on the bookshelf. We can talk about it. And it's beautiful because now I think our communities are coming together. And again, as I mentioned before, there are so many similarities. I want to share this because I was amazed by this book. This is a book by Craig Santos Perez, and he's from Guam. And I'm reading this book and I'm thinking there are so many similarities between Puerto Rico and Guam, and that's something that I wish I had known, earlier in my life. So I think now with protest poetry, we're finally recognizing again our commonalities, and we're finally realizing writing is political. Writing is political. And we have a voice. Who else is going to tell our story but us? Put it on paper, put it out there. And I think it's beautiful. I feel like it, I really tell my students this all the time. I'm like, it's about time we're putting our stories out there for the world to see and for other people to know. If really, I feel that way with Craig Santos Perez. If I hadn't, really read his book, I would not have known how similar, Puerto Rico is to Guam. I mean, now I'm like fascinated. I'm like, why, how come history didn't teach this? I'm like, where have I been? I feel like I really should have known this, so I'm, fascinated. And I want to know, more. I'm sure there are other books too that are out there, especially by wonderful BIPOC poets that I haven't been exposed to. So I'm curious about, reading more books and learning.
What do you most hope people take away from this book?
I hope people are prepared, as I mentioned, for a social transformation. I hope people have a greater history, understanding of Puerto Rico when they come away from this book. Maybe they may want to visit Puerto Rico. Maybe they will think, oh, maybe I should do some research now about the history of Puerto Rico and learn about the complex history Puerto Rico has with the United States, because the election is coming and people still don't understand, like, we cannot vote for the president of the United States. We don't have the right to vote in the US election. And some people are shocked. They don't know that. And I tell people, like, we don't have that kind of representation in Congress. So then they wonder, what kind of representation do you have? And I say, well, we have this commission resident, but they don't really have any power either. But that's our representation, I put that in quotes, of Puerto Rico. So you see the levels of colonialism there. The book also has a poem called Promesa, which is this economic, I put that in quotes, act that was supposed to help Puerto Rico, put that help in quotes too, get out of its debt, but it has just thrust Puerto Rico in more economic austerity. So many people aren't aware of that because they just see the headline, oh, Puerto Rico has this debt, but they don't know the story of how Puerto Rico got in debt and is still in debt, and how the United States keeps the foot on the neck in many ways of Puerto Rico, so that Puerto Rico cannot get out of this debt and have more of a financial independence. And then the other part of the book I hope people come away with is just really having a deeper understanding of, again, the racial, social, economic injustices that are happening to BIPOC communities in the United States. There are so many important issues that the book touches upon. Police brutality. I mentioned a Ghost Talker poem about the BIPOC women that go missing. I also want to talk too about the invisibility of BIPOC people. One of the poems that I love too is How I Almost Lost My Name. And my first name is Dorsía. And I cannot tell you, growing up in Pennsylvania, how many teachers just said, oh, your name is what? Oh, you're Doris or Dorothy or D, because they thought my first name was just too difficult to learn. And I grew up at a time where there were many Amy's and Carols and Laurens and Lynn's and Heathers. And here my name, Dorsía, was like this anomaly. They were like, I don't know this name, can't figure it out, I'm not going to be bothered. And as a child growing up, I really thought, well, what am I, invisible? That's not my name. I'm not D. And there's nothing wrong with D or Dorothy or Doris, but that's not my name. My name is Dorsía. And so I really had to learn to understand what, this authority figure, because I grew up like teachers are up here, and you're always supposed to respect your teacher. And then realizing later there's some pushback to where I finally got to the point where I had to tell, the teacher, my name is Dorsía, not Dorothy. Oh. And then really I had to like mime it out later. Door, see, like phonetically. And then they were like, oh, okay. But I had to learn to speak up for myself. And I was very, very shy growing up. And again, I said, I grew up like the teacher is up here. You always respect the teacher. But then learning this is the pushback that sometimes has to happen, especially as a person of color. If the teacher is showing you a form of disrespect, you owe it to yourself to say, no, that's not my name. This is my name, and you will give me that respect back. But it took a while, to get there. So I think sometimes people don't understand that either. Sometimes people will say, well, it's just a name. Why are you making such a big deal? Because it's a level of respect. And if you can learn the other student's name, then you can also learn my name as well. So I hope people, take all that away by the time they get to the end of the book. And again, coming back to hurricane season, also think about where we are with our relationship to hurricanes. I mentioned in the book about treating the earth as our kin. You mentioned to me as one of your questions about having the water be our mothers. If we think about that, our relationship to the earth, if we think about our connection to the earth, treat it kindly, treat it gently, I think then we'll be in a better position where hurricane season it's just another part of the year. We'll be more in tune to the environment. We don't have to always then be trying to catch up after it, because hurricane season, it's every year. It's always going to be June 1st to November 30th. But the way that we're going, we're not really conscious of what we're doing to the environment. We let the tap run, the air conditioning run, we're not even in the room, the lights on, the water running when we take a bath. We're not really conscious of what we're doing and how we're depleting all these resources and how that then extends to global warming and climate change. So hopefully the book will make us more mindful, and then we can think, if I treat the water like my mother, okay, if I treat it like kin, I'll respect it, okay? Because we're all connected in that way. And if we don't think of it that way, then we are going to see, what we're seeing right now. We're going to see, unfortunately, stronger hurricanes in a much more intense hurricane season.
Hey, I did have so many questions about this book, and I really hope everybody reads it because it was so fascinating. But we're definitely not getting into all of the questions because we're very close to time now. But could you just stay long enough to give our viewers a prompt?
Yes. One of my favorite prompts, well, actually, I have two. Okay, so one of my favorite prompts is a walking prompt. Okay, so the prompt is you're going to go outside. And what is the first color that you see? For me, normally when I go outside, the first color is green because I'm in the Caribbean and we have green trees, green flowers. So I normally write about green. But the poem is going to center around, as you go walking, look for objects that are based on that color. And then you're going to form a poem based on that color. So it's a walking poem based on color. So when you're walking outside, take a little notepad or you can have your phone and just go walking. Jot down everything that you see, okay? Things that you hear. Okay, and then later you'll go back and link it to that color. So let's say you hear a conversation. It's a green conversation or a red conversation or a blue conversation. Okay, if you see some children playing outside, the children were blued into playing. Okay, so you can use that color as a noun, as an adjective, as a verb. You will then form different layers of that poem as you write it. So that is one prompt. And for those that think, oh my goodness, that's too difficult, you're asking too much, oh my goodness, I just want to go for a walk, I don't want to think about colors. This one is simpler. Okay, this is a simpler prompt for those of you. This prompt is very easy. You're going to write about what you will inherit. Now, what you will inherit, it can be a physical object, maybe something you'll get passed down from a family member, a bracelet, a memento, a photo. It could be an object of clothing. It could be a letter. It could also be something intangible. Okay, it could be something maybe love that you feel from the environment. You feel like I'm going to inherit that. The book is actually dedicated to my son. And what I put for my son is, you inherited love. Because I want him to know, in this world where there's so many injustices happening, you inherited love. And so that could be what you think you inherited, and the poem could be, I inherited love. So whatever you inherited, that's going to be the first line of your poem, I inherited love. You could also make that the end line of your poem, but it's a poem about what you believe you have inherited. And I really like this prompt because it can take you many different places. And if we go back to another favorite poem of mine in the book is my grandmother's photo. And we think about objects that get destroyed by hurricanes, but we think about those mementos that mean something to us. Our cell phones are important, yes, but you think of those photographs that hold memories, and it could be also maybe an heirloom that got passed down. And some people, it could be jewelry that gets passed down, a wedding dress or a handkerchief, something that was handmade, or a letter. I mean, I love those kind of mementos. And then your family will say, this has always been in our family. You're going to inherit this, at a certain point when you're 18 or 19 or 20. I've always told certain things to my child, you're going to get this when you're 18. And he's like, well, why not now, mommy? And I'm like, no, when you're 18, when you're old enough to understand, okay, and take care of it. But I think it's beautiful, what you feel you've inherited. And again, if there's nothing tangible, then the intangible, because we're inheriting, I hope, a world that will end in positivity, a world that will end in green, and that's what I'm hoping. I mentioned the word green, but green in the sense of a world that is just full of wonder, full of trees and air that we can breathe and flowers that we can enjoy, gardens for us to walk. Gwendolyn Brooks has this beautiful poem, and I just want to quote the end of it. It's a poem to the young who want to die. And she says at the end, graves grow no green that you can use. Remember, green's your color. You are spring. And I think that's so beautiful for us to remember. Green is positivity, but we have to do our part to help the earth stay green. And remember, you are spring. There's so many meaningful things to think about with spring, but the most important, I think, is, we have the ability to rejuvenate, to have life, and to have this wonderful sense of positivity. And I do have a beautiful poem in Terrain. It's called G is for Greenhood, which talks about the wonders of green and how beautiful the world is. So if you want to read something lighter, you can go to Terrain and read G is for Greenhood, because I do have some poems that are more lighthearted than what's in the book. And I definitely, when I'm feeling lighthearted, I love using, green anywhere in a poem. For me, it invokes a sense of positivity. But in this book, green is also, in the poem I have about Archive of Green, of course, we see green with money, and unfortunately with, the connotations of power that are linked there with green. So green can also be used in different ways, but I do like to think of it overall in a very positive way.
Thank you so much, Dorcia. This was amazing. I learned so much.
I can't believe it's over. I feel like I could keep going.
I would be so happy to listen to you talk, but I want to be conscious of your time. But this book was amazing. This conversation was amazing.
Oh, thank you so much.
I can't wait.
This was so much fun. I had so much fun chatting with you. This was just amazing. Yeah, I can't believe it's time already. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your time as well. It's been wonderful.
Have a good rest of your day and week.
You too. And good luck with everything. I know that you said that you're a student and that you're working very hard, and then you're
Thank you. I'm not a student anymore.
Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. I graduated in 2022.
Oh my goodness. I thought when I read your message that it said that you were a student and you were also working.
No. I teach full time. So I have
you just teach full time. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's amazing. Congratulations on graduating.
Thank you.
And teaching full time and doing this too is amazing. So kudos to you for doing it all.
Thank you so much.
It's a lot. It's a lot. So kudos, really. It's a lot.
Thank you. No, I find it so inspiring that you've been able to do both, because I feel like a lot of people feel like they have to choose either the academic route or the creative writing route. So it's really inspiring to see a BIPOC woman who's been able to take it all the way in both areas.
I think it's important. Yeah, definitely. If that's what you want, there's a community that will cheer you on to get there. And I definitely tell people, if you need help, I'm definitely there to help you, because I think we definitely need BIPOC women to stay, if that's what you want, in academia, because I think it really helps representation. There's so few of us sometimes that you think, my goodness, who's helping the students? Because I relate to my students in a very different way than I think others do. So I think, there really need to be more of us, if that's what you want. But there are other people who say, I'm leaving the path of academia, and that's fine too. It's your choice. But I think teaching full time and doing this, commendable. I take my hat off to you. It's wonderful that you're doing it. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.